Building the greatest flood defense on Earth, the flood of 1953 changed the Netherlands forever. More than 1,800 lives had been lost. Entire communities had vanished beneath the sea. The Dutch had learned a painful lesson. No nation, no matter how experienced, could rely on outdated defenses forever. If another storm of similar strength arrived, history would repeat itself. This time, the country refused to wait. Only weeks after the disaster, engineers, scientists, and government officials gathered with one objective: to make sure it could never happen again. What followed became one of the largest engineering projects humanity has ever attempted. Not simply a new dike, not just stronger flood walls, but the complete redesign of an entire coastline. The project would become known as the Delta Works. At first glance, the idea sounded almost impossible. The Netherlands is crossed by countless rivers, estuaries, and tidal channels connecting the North Sea to the country's interior. These waterways had shaped Dutch life for centuries. Ships depended on them. Fishing communities relied upon them. Wildlife flourished because of them. Simply building one enormous wall across the coast would destroy the natural balance of the region. Engineers needed a different solution, one that could stop catastrophic floods without destroying the sea itself. The Delta Works would eventually consist of dozens of interconnected projects: massive dams, gigantic storm surge barriers, reinforced dikes, navigation locks, floodgates, artificial islands, hundreds of kilometers of strengthened coastline. Construction would continue for more than 40 years. At its peak, thousands of engineers, architects, divers, crane operators, and construction workers were involved. Every structure had to withstand conditions unlike almost anywhere else on Earth: powerful tides, saltwater corrosion, violent winter storms, and waves capable of moving concrete blocks weighing several tons. Failure was not an option. One challenge quickly became obvious: traditional concrete simply wasn't enough. When massive waves crash against a smooth wall, enormous forces build up almost instantly. Instead of resisting those forces directly, Dutch engineers developed an entirely different philosophy. Rather than fighting every wave, they would absorb its energy. This led to the creation of one of the most recognizable pieces of coastal engineering in the world: the concrete armor block, known by names like tetrapods, delos, and specially designed interlocking barriers. These enormous structures scatter wave energy before it can damage the dike behind them. Instead of acting as a single wall, thousands of individual blocks work together. Today, similar systems protect coastlines across Europe, Asia, North America, and the Pacific. Many of them were inspired by techniques perfected in the Netherlands. Yet the crown jewel of the Delta Works would be something entirely different: the Oosterscheldekring, or, in English, the Eastern Scheldt Storm Surge Barrier. Even by modern standards, its scale is astonishing, stretching approximately 9 kilometers across one of the country's largest estuaries. It consists of 65 enormous concrete piers. Each weighs up to 18,000 tons. Between them hang gigantic steel gates. Most of the time, the gates remain open. The tides continue to flow. Fish migrate naturally. Saltwater ecosystems survive. Shipping moves without interruption. But whenever an extreme storm approaches, the gates close. Within hours, one of Europe's largest openings to the sea transforms into an almost impenetrable wall. It is a remarkable compromise between engineering and nature. Instead of permanently shutting out the sea, the Dutch chose to cooperate with it. Building the barrier required extraordinary precision. The concrete piers were not poured at sea. Instead, they were constructed inside massive dry docks. Once completed, each giant pillar was carefully floated into position using specially designed vessels. Divers worked beneath freezing water to prepare the seabed. Powerful cranes lowered each structure onto foundations with an accuracy measured in centimeters. A single mistake could have delayed construction for months. Yet despite the immense difficulty, the project succeeded. When Queen Beatrix officially opened the barrier in 1986, many engineers described it as one of humanity's greatest technical achievements. Some even called it the eighth wonder of the modern world. But the Delta Works did not stop there. Another engineering marvel would soon rise near Rotterdam, one of Europe's busiest ports. Every year, tens of thousands of ships enter Rotterdam from the North Sea. Closing the harbor permanently with a traditional dam was impossible. Global trade depended on uninterrupted access. Once again, engineers faced an impossible problem: protect the city without blocking the ships. Their solution looked almost like science fiction. The Messland barrier consists of 2 enormous floating gates. Each arm is longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall. Each gate weighs nearly 7,000 tons. Normally, the gates rest quietly beside the navigation channel. Ships pass freely between them. Visitors often don't even notice they exist. But when sea levels rise beyond dangerous limits, everything changes. Powerful computers continuously monitor weather forecasts, tides, river discharge, and storm conditions. If a dangerous surge is predicted, the system automatically begins closing. The gates swing toward one another. Large ballast tanks fill with water. The floating structures sink onto the riverbed. Within a few hours, one of the world's busiest shipping routes becomes a giant flood barrier. After the storm passes, compressed air empties the ballast tanks. The gates float again, and maritime traffic resumes. The entire operation requires remarkably little human intervention. Most decisions are made automatically. The sea never sleeps. Neither does the system protecting the Netherlands. Today, experts from around the world travel to study the delta works. Engineers from the United States, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, the United Kingdom, and many other countries have adopted Dutch ideas for protecting their own coastlines. After Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2005, Dutch specialists were invited to help improve American flood protection. When Jakarta began sinking into the sea, Dutch engineers helped develop new defense strategies. Even Venice has benefited from Dutch expertise. Centuries of experience have turned the Netherlands into the world's leading authority on living with water. Yet perhaps the most remarkable lesson the Dutch learned was unexpected. For hundreds of years, they believed every drop of water had to be pushed away. Now, that philosophy is changing. Scientists have discovered that endlessly fighting nature is not always the best solution. Sometimes, the safest strategy is to make room for the river instead. Instead of building ever higher dikes, certain floodplains are deliberately allowed to flood. Entire landscapes have been redesigned to safely absorb excess water before it reaches cities. It represents one of the greatest shifts in Dutch thinking. The goal is no longer to defeat nature completely. The goal is coexistence. Because the sea is changing once again, global sea levels continue to rise. Storms grow more intense. Climate change presents challenges unlike anything previous generations faced. The Dutch know that history never truly ends. Every generation inherits the same responsibility. Protect the land, adapt, innovate, and prepare for whatever comes next. For over 1,000 years, the Netherlands has survived because it never believed yesterday's solutions would solve tomorrow's problems. That may be its greatest achievement of all. Building a new province from the sea for nearly 1,000 years, the Dutch had defended the land they already possessed. They built dikes, drained lakes, strengthened rivers, raised villages above the floodwaters. But during the 20th century, they asked an astonishing question. What if they didn't just protect the country? What if they made it bigger? Not by conquering another nation, not by claiming distant colonies, but by creating entirely new land where the sea had existed for centuries. It sounded impossible, yet the Netherlands had spent generations proving that impossible ideas often become reality. The greatest transformation would begin with a body of water called the Zuiderzee. For hundreds of years, the Zuiderzee dominated the heart of the Netherlands. Although many people think it was a true sea, it was actually a vast shallow inlet connected directly to the North Sea. Its waters stretched for thousands of square kilometers. Fishing villages depended upon it. Merchant ships crossed it daily. But it also remained one of the country's greatest dangers. Powerful storms regularly pushed seawater deep into the interior. Entire communities were destroyed. Farmland disappeared beneath salt water. Thousands lost their lives over the centuries. Every generation feared the next great flood. Dutch engineers knew that as long as the Zuiderzee remained open, the danger would never disappear. The dream of closing it off had existed for centuries. Many believed it could never be done. The opening connecting the Zuiderzee to the North Sea was enormous. Powerful tides rushed through it twice every day. Storms battered the coastline relentlessly. No one had ever attempted to build a dam on such a scale. Then came an engineer named Cornelis Lely. For decades, Lely argued that the impossible was not only possible, it was necessary. His proposal was bold. Construct one enormous dam across the entrance to the Zuiderzee. Transform the saltwater sea into a freshwater lake. Then gradually drain sections of the lake to create entirely new land. Many politicians laughed at the idea. Some newspapers called it fantasy. Others believed the costs would bankrupt the country. But history had taught the Dutch one lesson. Today's fantasy often becomes tomorrow's necessity. Construction finally began in 1927. The project became known as the Afsluitdijk, the closing dike, stretching more than 30 kilometers across open water. It was unlike anything previously attempted. Thousands of workers battled freezing winters, violent storms, and relentless waves. Ships delivered enormous quantities of sand, clay, stone, and basalt around the clock. Special barges dumped millions of cubic meters of material into the sea. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the two ends of the dam moved toward one another, year after year, meter by meter, until finally, on May 28, 1932, the final gap was closed. For the first time in history, the North Sea could no longer flow freely into the Zuiderzee. An entire sea had effectively been cut in half. Within only a few years, rainwater and river water gradually flushed out the salt. The Zuiderzee ceased to exist. In its place appeared a vast freshwater lake, the IJsselmeer, one of the largest freshwater lakes in Western Europe. Yet the Afsluitdijk was never the final goal. It was only the beginning. Now came the truly extraordinary task: creating new land. Dutch engineers selected enormous sections of the lake and surrounded them with massive dikes. Powerful pumping stations then began removing billions of cubic meters of water. Unlike earlier drainage projects, these were not small lakes. Entire landscapes emerged from beneath the water. Roads were planned before the land had even dried. Future towns existed first as blueprints. Engineers decided where forests would grow, where farms would be built, where canals would run, where people would one day live. Few countries in history have had the opportunity to design entire cities. Before the ground itself existed, the Netherlands did exactly that. One by one, new polders appeared: the Waringermeer, the Noordoostpolder, Eastern Flevoland, Southern Flevoland. Together they formed something remarkable, a completely new province, Flevoland. Today, Flevoland is the youngest province in the Netherlands. Yet, unlike every other province, it did not evolve naturally over centuries. It was designed. Every road, every canal, every field, every forest, every town, almost everything exists because someone first drew it on an engineer's map. Perhaps nowhere else on Earth has geography been planned so deliberately. The province also holds one of Europe's newest cities, Almere. In the early 1970s, almost nothing stood here. Today, more than 200,000 people call it home. Modern neighborhoods stretch across land that, only decades earlier, lay beneath several meters of water. Children play football where fish once swam. Families walk through parks that existed only a seafloor within living memory. History usually takes centuries to shape a city. Almere grew in only a few decades. But draining the sea revealed more than empty land. It uncovered forgotten history. As the water disappeared, archaeologists made astonishing discoveries. Ancient forests emerged from the mud, perfectly preserved tree trunks that had lain underwater for thousands of years. Stone tools from prehistoric hunters, Bronze Age artifacts, Roman objects, medieval shipwrecks. Some fishing boats had sunk centuries earlier and were suddenly resting in open fields. Farmers occasionally found anchors while plowing. Construction workers uncovered complete wooden vessels buried beneath layers of clay. Today, Flevoland contains one of Europe's richest collections of underwater archaeological discoveries, found not beneath the sea, but beneath farmland. The changing landscape also transformed wildlife. New wetlands quickly attracted thousands of birds. Among the most remarkable places is the Vaardersplaats. Originally, engineers expected this area to become another industrial zone. Instead, nature intervened. Because drainage was incomplete, shallow wetlands formed naturally. Migrating birds arrived in astonishing numbers. Soon the area became one of Europe's most important nature reserves. Wild horses, red deer, foxes, white-tailed eagles, and hundreds of bird species now thrive there. Ironically, one of humanity's greatest engineering projects accidentally created one of the continent's most valuable ecosystems. The Netherlands had accomplished something almost unimaginable. It had expanded its territory without firing a single shot. Instead of conquering neighbors, it had conquered geography. More than 17% of the country's modern land area has been reclaimed from water. Millions of people now live on land their ancestors could only have reached by boat. Some scientists estimate that without land reclamation, several of today's largest Dutch cities would either be dramatically smaller or simply would not exist. Yet success created new responsibilities. Every new polder required permanent maintenance. Every pump demanded electricity. Every dike needed constant inspection. Every canal had to be managed. The sea never forgot where it once stood. If maintenance stopped, water would return. The Dutch often say that their country is never truly finished. It is simply under continuous construction. Today, as sea levels continue rising, many countries wonder whether the Dutch miracle can continue. Can humanity keep building against the ocean forever? Or will future generations need entirely new solutions? Remarkably, the Netherlands may already have the answer, because after centuries of forcing the sea backward, the Dutch have begun experimenting with something completely different. Instead of asking, how do we remove the water? They now ask, how do we live with it? That question will shape the future of the Netherlands, and perhaps, the future of every coastal nation on Earth. The future of a country below the sea for more than 1,000 years. The Dutch fought the sea. They built dikes, raised villages, drained lakes, created entirely new provinces, constructed some of the greatest engineering projects in human history. It would be easy to believe they had finally won, but the truth is more complicated, because the greatest challenge may still lie ahead. Today, climate change is altering coastlines across the planet. Global sea levels continue to rise. Scientists estimate that during this century, oceans could rise by several additional feet if greenhouse gas emissions remain high. For most countries, this is a future problem. For the Netherlands, it is today's reality. Every centimeter matters. A higher sea means stronger storm surges, greater pressure on dikes, more difficult river drainage, and increased risk for millions of people living below sea level. But instead of panicking, the Dutch are doing what they have always done. They are adapting. One of the biggest surprises is that the Netherlands is no longer trying to keep every drop of water out. For centuries, engineers believed higher dikes were the answer. Now, they think differently. One of the country's most ambitious modern projects is called Room for the River. The name sounds simple. The idea is revolutionary. Instead of squeezing rivers between taller and taller dikes, engineers are giving rivers more space. Old floodplains have been restored. Some dikes have been moved farther away from the river. Artificial side channels have been created. Entire areas are intentionally allowed to flood during periods of extremely high water. At first, many people opposed the idea. After centuries of fighting water, why would anyone willingly allow floods? The answer is surprisingly simple. Controlled flooding prevents catastrophic flooding. Sometimes, the safest place for water is exactly where engineers want it to be. Another extraordinary project lies along the Dutch coastline. From the sky, it looks like an enormous hook extending into the North Sea. It is known as the sand motor. Unlike traditional seawalls, the sand motor works with nature instead of against it. In 2011, engineers deposited more than 20 million cubic meters of sand along one stretch of coast. Rather than moving the sand manually every year, they let the sea do the work. Waves, tides, and currents slowly distribute the sand along nearby beaches. Nature itself strengthens the coastline. The Dutch call this building with nature. Instead of forcing the ocean to obey, they encourage natural processes to solve the problem. The country's cities are changing too. In several parts of the Netherlands, entire neighborhoods now float. Floating houses rise and fall with changing water levels. Some are permanently anchored. Others are designed to move gently with the tides. Modern architects believe floating communities may become increasingly important. As sea levels continue rising, what once sounded like science fiction is already becoming reality. In cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam, people are learning that living on water can be just as practical as living beside it. Technology now plays a role previous generations could scarcely imagine. Thousands of sensors monitor dikes 24 hours a day. Satellites measure tiny movements in the ground. Artificial intelligence analyzes weather forecasts. Supercomputers simulate storm surges years before they happen. If even the smallest weakness appears in a flood defense, engineers often know long before human eyes could detect it. The Dutch have transformed centuries of experience into one of the world's most advanced water management systems. Yet despite all this technology, some of the most popular stories about the Netherlands aren't true at all. Perhaps you've heard one of them. A small boy notices water leaking through a dike. To save his country, he sticks his finger into the hole. He remains there all night until help arrives. It's one of the world's most famous stories about the Netherlands. Children around the globe have grown up hearing it. There is only one problem. It never happened. The story does not come from Dutch history. It actually originated in an American children's novel called Hans Brinker, or The Silver Skates, written by Mary Mapes Dodge in 1865. Ironically, most Dutch people never heard the story until foreigners began asking them about it. The legend became more famous outside the Netherlands than inside it. Real Dutch flood defense has never depended upon one heroic child. It has always depended upon thousands of ordinary people working together. Another widespread myth concerns windmills. Tourists often believe they were built mainly to grind grain. Some certainly were, but many of the country's most famous windmills served a completely different purpose. They pumped water. Without them, much of the Netherlands would still be underwater today. The windmills that visitors photograph each year were once among the most important machines in Europe. They were not symbols, they were survival. Then there are the tulips. Ask someone to name the national flower of the Netherlands, and most people immediately think of colorful tulip fields. Yet tulips are not originally Dutch. They arrived from the Ottoman Empire during the 16th century. The Dutch perfected their cultivation, but they did not invent the flower. Even one of the country's most famous symbols has roots elsewhere. Another misconception is that all of the Netherlands lies below sea level. It doesn't. Roughly 1/4 of the country is below sea level. Another large portion sits only slightly above it. Some eastern and southern regions contain hills that rise more than 300 meters above sea level. The Netherlands is low, but it is not completely flat. Nature, once again, is more complicated than popular myths suggest. Perhaps the greatest myth of all is that the Dutch defeated the sea. They never truly did. Ask any Dutch engineer, and you'll hear a different answer. You do not defeat the sea. You negotiate with it. Every dike requires maintenance. Every pump requires electricity. Every storm demands respect. The sea is never conquered, only managed. For now, that may be the Netherlands' greatest lesson for the rest of the world. Humanity cannot always control nature, but it can understand it, adapt to it, work alongside it. For over 1,000 years, the Dutch have demonstrated that survival is not about overpowering the environment. It is about cooperation, patience, innovation, and the willingness to keep improving generation after generation. There is an old Dutch saying, God created the earth, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. After everything you've seen, it no longer sounds like an exaggeration, because almost every canal, every polder, every windmill, every dike, every pumping station, and every field reclaimed from the sea exists because countless ordinary people refused to accept the limits that nature had given them. They inherited water. They built land. They inherited danger. They built safety. They inherited uncertainty. They built one of the most remarkable countries on earth. And perhaps, the story of the Netherlands has never really been about defeating the sea. It has always been about proving what human determination can accomplish when an entire nation works together toward a single goal. As long as the tides continue to rise, that story is far from over. The battle continues, but so does the Netherlands.